Also known as KSU tab. And I'd like to welcome you and thank you for attending our webinar for grant writing strategies. We will start with obviously day one. If you could change the slide. And just going over some housekeeping and ground rules. If you experience any technical difficulties, here's the number if you want to jot that down. And also you can email chsr@ksu.edu. And the presentation is being recorded and will be available on the website that you registered at. And the link is being put in the chat box. Next slide. Zoom basics. If you could make sure that you are muted and your video is also turned off. That is so, you know, we don't have everybody's face up here, including mine, and crowding everything out. And then the chat box should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you have questions, please enter them in the chat box. We will be monitoring that. And then also, if you do have a different name or no name on your video or on your basically you haven't signed one to Zoom, please do so and make it the name that you are registered as. If you're unable to do that, please email chsr.ksu.edu, and that way they will be able to know who you are, match you up, send you a certificate of attendance. Next slide. And this is being put on along with Ohio EPA by the Technical Assistance to Brownfields, which is a national program. It is funded through grants provided by US EPA. And what we and other entities are charged with in the different regions is to provide technical assistance to communities and tribes for brownfields revitalization. The big thing to take away is this, and we'll talk more about it today, the services are free and tailored to meet your specific needs. Next slide. And this is our agenda for the day. I'm doing the welcome and introductions along with Lisa Shook, who will come on next, who is our Ohio Brownfields and VAP manager for Ohio EPA. And then I'll give a quick overview of the MARC grants, the grants that will be the ones that will actually be out this fall. And then we will have a panel presentation for sections 1 and 2. Oh, I forgot. We'll have an update from Carla Ocker from US EPA about some of the new information that she's aware of regarding the FY24 MARC grants. And then the panel presentation, we will break you up to do group exercises, and then we'll have a report out and conclude. Next slide. And these are our panelists, and we'll talk, introduce them later. Next slide. And I'm going to pass this over to Lisa Shook with Ohio EPA, and I'll take it on, Lisa.
Thank you, Amy. I'm so glad everyone could make it this morning. We are very excited to be hosting this again. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill really has afforded such wonderful opportunities in the brownfield arena with these US EPA grants, more so than we've seen in many years. And so we hope to continue to see a large number of grants coming out of Ohio and hopefully a significant amount of awardees. So we're so happy to have you all here. And we are excited for the next 2 days of presentations. So first, I really just want to thank all of our partners that have helped us put this together, especially the KSU TAB staff, Amy Yersovich and Beth Grigsby, as well as all of their behind the scenes team supporting this webinar today. We also have Carla Ocker from US EPA, and tomorrow Lucy Stanfield from Verdantis. We have Jetty Carter Cornell, and from the Cuyahoga County Land Reutilization Corporation, Kim Kimlin, and my wonderful staff, especially Dan Jolker and Roxanne Anderson, who are all presenting and helping with different portions today. We really do hope you find all of the information presented to be very helpful and useful and gives you extra tools for your toolbox. And we really hope to see your grant requests in the fall. So thank you all for being here again, and back to you, Amy.
Okay, I'm going to give you, thank you, Lisa, and I'm going to give you a short synopsis of the multi-purpose assessment and cleanup grants. We are not talking about revolving loan funds because they will not, as far as we know, be offered this year. Next slide. Okay, we start out with the legal definitions of brownfields. I think the thing you want to keep in mind when you are working with brownfields and or if you're not as familiar with them is that what I have outlined or underlined here, it's real property, and the reason it's not being redeveloped or redevelopment's being hindered is because of the potential presence or actual presence of hazardous substances or another contaminant. This actually comes from the federal law, which is also listed here. The Ohio EPA definition of brownfields is a little bit different, but contains those key points, which is the property, the hindrance of redevelopment by potential or real contamination. Next slide. And why redevelop brownfields? It makes financial sense. It may not have in the past because people were worried that there was cleanup involved, and it could be any type, any amount of cleanup, large cleanup, very expensive cleanup to small. But now with the passage of the Brownfields law by the federal government, and most every state in the union has a brownfields and or voluntary cleanup program. There's a lot of funding available at the federal level as well as the state and local level. And that obviously helps fill the gap, for one thing. Another thing about providing that funding, or in some cases in-kind services, is that many communities can get their assessments conducted at no charge, or they receive funding to pay for them, and that way it's a known as to what needs to be cleaned up or not. And some of the other points are that there is existing infrastructure usually available. Since these are older sites, they usually have electric, sewer, so on and so forth. One of the big things that always surprises me is it reduces the amount of impervious surface expansion by 80%, which is huge. Not going out into farm fields, other properties where we have a lot of green space, and therefore they're reusing in areas where there was already development. Increases the local tax base and also facilitates, in many cases, job growth. And you can see some of the achievements, and this is as of April 2023 from US EPA, as far as properties cleaned up and leveraged and jobs leveraged. It's a good thing all around. Next slide. So who's eligible? Local units of government. So cities, counties, villages, townships, school districts, councils of government, all kinds of folks. States and Indian tribes can apply for brownfield grants, planning and redevelopment authorities, and that can be, some of our transportation authorities, things like that. Special districts of government. So you may be aware of some sewer districts in the state, levy districts in other states, turnpike authorities. Those can all be found eligible to be recipient. And there are other organizations often chartered by state legislatures, all 501c3 nonprofits, and your IRS new market tax credit districts. Next slide. So if you have a site in mind and are wondering if it would be eligible for the funds, doesn't meet the brownfield definition, and we already went over that. Is it subject to any environmental enforcement action? Do you own or have you owned the property? You do need to own the property. In the case of a cleanup, we'll talk about that later. How did you acquire the property? So, is in the case of a city, did you end up because of tax defaults and things like that? Or was it purchased? Have you caused or contributed to any contamination? And that can have a big factor in whether you're eligible or not. If you're not sure, if you have any questions in mind, check with your EPA regional contact. Those contacts are listed in the current guidelines. Right now it's FY23, but when FY24 comes out, each region has a contact. Also with enforcement, not only getting a hold of the EPA contact, you may want to also contact Ohio EPA, and they often will know a lot about both state and federal enforcement. And what can I clean up? Hazardous substances, as we mentioned, petroleum, old gas stations, things like that, asbestos and lead-based paint, quite common in old buildings that you might be redeveloping, and also mine-scarred land and controlled substances. Next slide. So this year, as I mentioned, we don't have a revolving loan fund, so we have MAC grants. And those are as follows: multi-purpose. That is keeping in mind that you're going to be doing cleanup as well as assessment. You have to clean up at least one site, at least under the current or the 23 guidelines. And what's good about these multi-purpose grants is they allow you to spend money to develop plans for revitalization, maybe market studies, planning, visioning, all kinds of different options to help you plan to actually revitalize an area. Assessment grants, there are both coalition, and we'll talk about those, and community-wide assessment grants. And community-wide is also not just communities, but it's also states and tribes can apply for community-wide. And these are for your phase 1 and phase 2 types of investigations, but also you can develop a brownfields inventory, or maybe update, revise your brownfields inventory as part of this. Sampling and analysis of media, and you can do cleanup and redevelopment planning, not necessarily cleanup, but the planning of it. Cleanup grants, these are for sites that have well-defined environmental contamination. They have to have a phase 1 and a complete phase 2. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Remedial activities, once that has been developed, and also implementing engineering and institutional controls. Next slide. Assessment grants. They, as I mentioned before, phase 1s, phase 2s, hazmat surveys, other types of environmental sampling, asbestos surveys, things like that are all included under the assessment grant. You can conduct cleanup and reuse planning, and that is important to aligning the brownfield development goals with your community vision, but also with your community plans. Most of you have planning documents for, you know, your community, city, village, whatever. Obviously, determining if site cleanup is necessary. You can do site use assessments, not necessarily cleanup. You can also do market studies. You can infrastructure evaluation, since these are often our old properties and you want to know what infrastructure is present and what shape it is in, and also revitalization plans. And as I mentioned before, conducting an inventory of priority brownfield sites in your community. Next slide. So there's two types. First one is a community-wide assessment grants. They're appropriate for communities that are beginning to address their brownfield challenges. So maybe they have an inventory or have started an inventory or have a plan for revitalization from one of their community plans. And it's, you know, basically to help them start that whole process going. And rather than concentrating on just one specific site to assess, that may be the best investment of brownfield grant dollars. Applicants for community-wide assessment can assess one or more sites in their target areas. They don't really, give out site-specific assessment grants anymore. It really makes a lot more sense to have a number of sites in mind. Sometimes these sites may not work out for one or the other reason. So we are looking at a community-wide assessment and usually focusing on a target area where revitalization is needed or planned. You can ask up to $500,000, that's FY23 money. The period of performance is 4 years. As I mentioned, these are both state and tribal grants, which have some different requirements and different amounts that they can request, and their period of performance is longer. Or in the case of communities, cities, townships, counties, villages, that sort of thing, this is basically the requirements. I'm sure Carla will update us on that soon. Next slide. Okay, coalition grants, they are basically designed to have a very experienced partner. It could be a state entity, it could be a city that has done a number of grants, and some entity, government entity or nonprofit entity or other eligible applicant that has a lot of experience, and then bringing on at least 2 to 3 coalition members that likely have very little or no experience with brownfields grants. And the idea being, of course, that those smaller communities that don't necessarily have the capacity at this point in time to manage a grant, and brownfield grants can be rather complicated to manage at times. They actually have a chance to learn from the more experienced entity that is the coalition lead, and it's a good experience for everybody. You know, properties get assessed, and the communities learn, and they in turn can ask for other grants, either US EPA or through other means. Applicants can request up to $500,000. Again, that's FY23 money, and the period of performance is 4 years. Next slide. So cleanup grants, these can fund activities needed to remediate a site. So we're including preparation of detailed cleanup plans. At that point, once you have a complete phase 2, you're ready to actually get into the details of what you're going to be cleaning up. Remedial activities, you know, which can include anything from tank removal to asbestos removal to groundwater cleanup, that sort of thing, and construction of engineering controls and monitoring equipment, development and filing of institutional controls. And in most cases in the state of Ohio, if not all, that's a deed restriction. It can be different in different states. You cannot use these cleanup grants for sampling to kind of supplement what you already have with your phase 1 and phase 2. You can do confirmatory sampling, and that is certainly eligible under the cleanup grant. Next slide. So the thing about a cleanup grant is there is a lot of upfront work that you do have to do. And we'll be talking about in the next 2 days, the importance of doing some of this work upfront, starting now, if not, if you haven't already. But one of the things, as I mentioned before, the site has to be owned by the applicant. If it isn't owned now, it does have to be owned by the applicant at the time of grant application submission. And again, the site determined, make sure that you know whether or not that site is eligible. So if you've already got the site in mind, good time to talk to the EPA regional contacts and make sure that it truly is eligible. Phase 1 in a complete ASTM compliant phase 2 investigation have to be conducted. In addition, you have community notification requirements. You have to have a public notice. You have to have a public comment period. You have to have a draft analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives. There are examples on US EPA's website of how you do ABCAs. And then, of course, you have to conduct your public meeting, and that all has to be done before application. There are timelines. EPA grants can provide gap funding for expensive cleanup, so it doesn't have to cover the whole cleanup. There are tiers, at least in FY23, of what you could ask for, going up to $1 million. So it can be used for fairly large cleanups, and they may pay for all of them. EPA cleanup grants often leverage other money. So HUD CDBG, other state resources, and to demonstrate federal resource commitments to developers, lenders, and others.
Hey, Amy.
Yeah.
We actually have a question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
If you have a structure on your property with asbestos, can demolition of the structure be included?
I don't believe so.
I don't know if Carla's on.
Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah,
Carla.
I'm here. Sorry, it's taking me a minute to unmute. Find my button. Demolition is not an eligible cost for US EPA cleanup grants. However, if say the building is in just really horrible shape and it's unsafe to go inside the building to do asbestos remediation, in those instances, at least the part of the building that's unsafe to access can be included in the cleanup. It is an eligible cost for cleanup and can be included in the grant.
Thank you, Carla. That definitely clarifies it, and good for me too, because it does, a lot of these things, especially with respect to assessment. And I know for Ohio EPA and some of the grants there, it's the same way. If it's part of what is needed to actually complete the cleanup, it can be eligible.
Yeah, and one more thing I'd like to point out, if that's okay,
Absolutely.
is that Ohio EPA has their demolition and remediation fund that just got reauthorized, and the money, the US EPA cleanup grants can be used as match for the Ohio remediation grants, and vice versa. Nowadays, we're not charging a match for our cleanup grants, but because we're using the infrastructure law money, and that doesn't require a match, but our normal statute does require match. So, just keep that in mind, that if you need demolition, well, I have to kind of clarify. If you need demolition, the US EPA cleanup grant can be used as match for that demolition work. However, the flip side's not applicable because demolition is not an eligible cost under a US EPA cleanup grant. Demolition can't be used as match. So if you have further questions about that, I know it's a little bit confusing, feel free to reach out to me.
That's a great question and good information. Thank you so much, Carla. Next slide. And for the FY23 cleanup grants, a letter from Ohio EPA or the state that you are located in is required, and it's and it must state that the site's been characterized thoroughly enough to develop a cleanup plan. It's likely to be required for FY24, though Carla may be able to help us with that with her next presentation. This is important because I know in the past the funding that has been provided for cleanup grants, certainly not in most cases, but in some cases has not been enough because of the inability or the lack of information to characterize the site thoroughly. And I'm going to pass this to Lisa really quick, since her section actually develops these letters along with the acknowledgement letters.
Thanks, Amy. We do provide these letters to the grantees. Once we have the dates for when the grants are due, we backdate a time and have a specific deadline for these requests as well that are a couple weeks in advance of the grant deadline so that we can make sure we can get them to you in a timely fashion. And we will have instructions on our webpage for what we need from you and who to send it to and a deadline for when to send it. And we will get those letters out. You'll see an example in the work, the group exercise today. There's a copy of one in the grants. For MARC grants, they do want us to state affirmatively that you have completed all of your phase 2 work or will have it done by a specific date. So in order to be able to say that for you, we have last year requested with this request to us that you include a copy of your APCA, the analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives, any remedial action plans, your phase 1, your phase 2 for the proposed cleanup projects. That way our staff can take a look at it and make sure that, we do think you are in fact, prepared for this cleanup grant, that you do have all of your assessment work done or will likely have it done by the appropriate deadline. So Roxanne Anderson, my staff, generally take the lead on collecting all that information, and then we put the letters together and we get them to you by the deadline. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. Next slide. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about multi-purpose grants. As I mentioned before, you can conduct cleanup and assessment work, but it is more because you are going to be able to also conduct planning and other activities in your target area in order to take that area from the point of ready for brownfields development. So we want you, or US EPA wants you in these cases to get this to be so quote unquote a shovel ready site. Next slide. And with that, I thank you. Here's Beth and I's, and you'll see them a few other times. Contact information. And Beth, is there another question?
Yes, there was. It's really directed towards the demolition project against. If you have a structure on your property with asbestos, oh, that's not the question. The question is the same idea, but how do you show that a building is unsafe to enter?
Good question. I think, again, we probably need to rely on Carla's expertise.
Yeah, for us, for US EPA, we generally kind of take your word for it. But if you can have and also attach to the application an engineer's determination that the building is unsafe to enter, that's best. If you have a condemnation notice, you know, that oftentimes will work as well. We're not real picky on the documentation. But I do suggest, so that there's no questions, that you at least have like your city engineer determine that it's unsafe to enter.
Yeah, and would a building commissioner be able to make that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, we don't have any guidelines or restrictions on who has to make the determination.
Okay.
It sounds kind of silly, but it kind of has to pass the laugh test. And just, yeah, we don't have any specific certifications.
Well, Kim actually had another comment. She said your asbestos surveyor will report to you that the building is unsafe to enter. The
Well, there
building
you have
may
it.
be able to be surveyed, but is too unsafe to abate. So there
Okay.
you have a letter from them.
Great.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you,
Good
Kim. That's good
questions.
information.
Very good questions. And with that, keep your mic open, Carla, because I'd like to introduce Carla Ocker, who's Brownfields manager for US EPA Region 5. And most of you have probably heard or met her before. She's quite the expert on the Brownfields grants, and she will give you some FY24 priorities and changes. So take it on, Carla.
Thanks, Amy. Thank you. I'm going to approach this. Well, the first thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is our changes in funding and funding priorities. And then we'll go into, what the specific changes are for the different types of grants. But I'm going to address that from our administration's priorities, address the changes in that from that direction, instead of going through coalition assessment grants have changed this way. Community-wide assessment grants, here are the changes that are in those, because a lot of the changes overlap. With that said, let's just jump right into it. Maggie, thank you. The funding changes. We are US EPA, and speaking of priorities, our administration now is really prioritizing reaching out to small communities, helping underserved communities, helping low capacity communities. With that said, our community-wide assessment grants and coalition assessment grants, we're focusing mostly on coalition assessment grants. As you can see from the slide, in FY23, we awarded 110 community-wide assessment grants at $500,000 apiece. This year, this is all drafted, subject to change, but this year it's likely that we're only going to award about 60 community-wide assessment grants. That's new and existing communities, like communities that have had our grants in the past and communities that are new applicants. That's a 45% decrease in the number of awards. However, that decrease is going to be seen in the coalition assessment grants. Not only are we upping the amount of money that's available through a coalition assessment grant from $500,000 to $1 million, we're planning on, last year we awarded 19 coalition assessment grants. This year we're looking more like 26 or 27 coalition assessment grants, and we're upping the amount of money from $1 million to $1.5 million. The project period will stay the same. It is 4 years, but you can see the difference. Like I said, priorities. Just always think as you're writing your application, as you're brainstorming how to approach the grant application, think about our priorities. Our priorities are low capacity and small communities. And like I said, that's why we're focusing on the coalition assessment grants. And I'll give you a little more information on those a little bit later on. But the entities that are eligible for the coalitions, you have to have a high capacity entity as the lead coalition member, and then either new grantees or grantees who have not had a grant from us since that closed in 2016 or earlier, to be the non-lead members. You can't do what people used to do in the past with coalition assessment grants and have like two or three high capacity municipalities or two high capacity municipalities in a county, be the grant applicants. It has to be a high capacity lead member and low capacity coalition members, or non-lead coalition members. The cleanup grants, one of the big changes for our cleanup grants is last year we offered cleanup grants in 3 different tiers. Well, the first one was a grant requests up to $500,000. The second was grant requests from $500,000 to $1 million. And then the third was $1 million to $2 million. I've got a slide that covers what we're offering next year, but the important thing to remember or to note is that this year we are offering up to $5 million per award, and you can assess 1 or more sites with that. The multi-purpose grants, last year we offered 18, we awarded 18 grants at $800,000 a piece. We're going to up that a little bit this year. We'll likely award 20 multi-purpose grants, and the most you can request is $1 million. So we're increasing that. Next slide, please. Now, this next slide just goes into a little more detail on the cleanup grants, just so you can kind of get your head around that a little bit better. We anticipate awarding $96 million for cleanup grants this year. That is 20% more than we used to offer for all of our grants pre-Brownfields or Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So that kind of gives you an order of magnitude of why we are focusing on cleanup grants a lot this year. We're going to award about 40 grants for requests up to $500,000. The second tier, as you can see, has changed. It will be from $500,000 up to $2 million. And then for $2 million and $1 up to $5 million will be the third tier. And you can see the numbers of awards we're anticipating. Like I said, these numbers of awards could change, but this gives you a general idea. Like if we have grantees, applications that come in and are, exactly the same score and we've got the funding, we will, we may award, an additional 1 or 2 in each of these categories. Next slide, please. As I said, I'm going to approach the changes that I've seen in the draft guidelines. I just received the draft guidelines last week, went through them really quick. And, what I can tell you is that this administration's priorities are highly reflected in our grant guidelines. There's the statute, the Brownfields law dictates the nuts and bolts of what we have to require as far as the proposal guidelines and what the criterion are for our grants, but we can tweak things inside that, and we can inside the statutory framework to stress our different priorities. This year, and for the whole entire Biden administration, our priorities are community, environmental justice. So community engagement is highlighted a little bit more. Environmental justice is highlighted a little bit more. Climate resilience, you can imagine, with climate change, the Biden administration is looking for projects that will help with climate resilience. And as I said before, we really want to reach low capacity communities. We want to spread the money around. Next slide, please. For community engagement, that was one of the first priorities. This is exemplified in the addition of participant support costs being an eligible cost for assessment, coalition assessment, and multi-purpose grants. This was I can't say it. Participant support costs were included in last year's grants, but the reason I'm bringing them up, it's not a change for this year, but it's a big change from multiple years past before the Biden administration came to be. To give you an idea of what a participant support cost is, you can pay, and we all know and all of us who've tried to get a community meeting together know that it's hard to get people out to come to a community meeting. And sometimes especially low-income communities, if you offer stipends for people to come to the community meeting, hey, we'll give you $20 to come in and join our meeting, or a lot of times they'll give out gift cards. You can pay for attendees to travel. You can pay for childcare expenses. Say, for instance, just set up a room for people to leave their children in so they're babysat while the parents are able to participate. One thing that I really want to note, you do not see food and refreshments on here. That is still not an eligible cost for community meetings. I've included a couple of links for you to be able to get more information on community or participant support costs at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. Another priority, environmental justice. This is exemplified in the increased emphasis in our assessment, coalition, and multipurpose grants. And the guidelines have been tweaked in a way that more points are given for environmental justice answers than what had been in the past. For instance, you need to describe your environmental justice issues that are affecting the populations in your target areas and the severity of those issues. Please don't forget to talk about the severity of the environmental justice issues. That's one thing where grantees oftentimes will lose points. They'll say, oh, this is a, say for instance, for low income or they'll say, hey, this is a low income area, but not provide data and not talk about how low income it is. And another thing is, and you'll notice here, in bold, I say, or full points may not be awarded. You can take the italics off of that may, because I'm not allowed to say what's in the draft guidelines, but at least one identified target area, say for instance, your coalition assessment grants, each coalition member has to identify a target area that's within their geographic boundaries. At least one of the target areas, say for that coalition assessment grant, at least one of the target areas has to be in a disadvantaged census tract according to EPA's climate and economic justice screening tool. We just refer to it as CJEST. And I have the link for the CJEST tool down below there. Or full points may not be awarded. I will tell you, in the draft guidelines that I looked at, the number of points that can be awarded for that criterion in the grant application is very low. If you don't have at least one target area in a disadvantaged census tract. Another thing that's a little bit different is we specifically call out the CJEST tool. Last year, we were a little more wishy-washy on, you can use EJ Screen, you could use another tool for showing the disadvantaged census tracts. But this year we specifically call out, you have to use CJEST. You can use these other tools to support what you're trying to say as well, but you need to be able to get into CJEST and use CJEST, or you might lose some points. And that'll somewhat depend upon the reviewer. Next slide, please. A couple other points that are potential changes in the guidelines this year. You want to make sure that you talk about minimizing displacement of residents and or businesses in those disadvantaged areas. This may be particularly relevant for like cleanup and multipurpose grants, because you're going to be doing cleanups and you're going to be bringing, hopefully bringing in redevelopment. Gentrification is a big deal for EPA these days. So you want to make sure that you can show that you're not going to, bring in market rate housing in an area that really needs low income housing. You want to make sure, maybe a mix of market rate and low income is one way to approach that. And you may need to spend a certain percentage of site-specific funds in underserved communities. I did see that in one of the draft guidelines, and honestly, I can't remember which one it was off the top of my head, whether it was community-wide assessments, multipurpose, or coalition assessments. But there was a percentage in there that said that of site-specific funding, a certain percentage of it had to be spent in underserved communities. And when I say site-specific funding, I'm talking about your phase 1, phase 2 assessment money that you're spending. Next, so just the point is, keep an eye out, look in the guidelines, look for those percentages. Next slide, please. Climate resilience. This applies to all grant types. You need to be able to discuss how the proposed brownfield projects will improve local climate adaptation, mitigation capacity, and resilience. So start thinking about that ahead of time as you're picking your priority sites. Hey, I need to make sure I have a priority site that I can talk about climate resilience on. You know, that may influence which sites you choose to be your priority sites, because you can assess, this is particularly for assessment and multi-purpose grants, you can assess sites that are not listed as your priority sites, but you need to talk in detail about your 2, 3, or 3 priority sites in your grant application. So choose your priority sites wisely. Choose the sites that you can make an argument that that the assessment and remediation of these sites are going to meet the administration's priorities. Next slide, please. Reaching low capacity communities. I talked a little bit about this before. This priority is exemplified in particular in the change in funding for our coalition assessment grants. As I said, this year, our coalition assessment grant ceiling for requests is up to $1.5 million per coalition. That's up from $1 million last year, and in years past it was only like 500,000. A coalition consists of a high capacity lead member and 2 to 4 low capacity or quote new non-lead members. As I said before, the new non-lead member can be a grantee or be somebody or an entity that has had an assessment or cleanup grant in the past, but that assessment or cleanup grant has to have closed before 2016. That number might be 2015, but I'm pretty sure it's 2016. But make sure you look in the guidelines, read the guidelines carefully as you're choosing your coalition members. At least one of the target areas that are chosen, because like I said, each coalition member has to identify a target area. One of those target areas must be in an underserved community. I highly suggest that more than one of your target areas is in an underserved community. We won't be able to take off points if only one target area is in an underserved community, but it sure does look good if more than one is. Make sure, another thing is, the reaching low capacity communities. These low capacity communities, a lot of times there's not a lot of community engagement. And we have, for the coalition assessment grants, we quote, suggest or encourage a nonprofit as one of the non-lead members. And the reason we do that is, and we're doing it in this instance, is because there's a feeling that these nonprofits are more grassroots coalition members. So, we're really, really trying to reach, have community engagement, look for a coalition member that can help you reach the community, hear the community, reflect the community's needs and desires in the cleanup and redevelopment of the properties. Next slide, please. Another thing, this is not anything new really. This has to do with all the grants, but procurement has been a big issue and something that we've been looking at more closely the last couple of years. So I wanted to talk about that just briefly in this presentation. When I talk about procurement, I'm talking about when, once you get a grant, you need to acquire an environmental contractor. If you have an assessment grant, an environmental contractor who will do your phase 1s and your phase 2s with you, for you, I mean. And if you have a cleanup grant, you'll acquire an environmental contractor that will help you with the oversight and putting together bid specs and that sort of thing for the actual cleanup. The place where we see most of the procurement issues really is in the procurement of the environmental consultants for assessment and multi-purpose grants. You have to make sure that your procurement complies with 2 CFR parts 200 and part 1500 or part 200 and part 1500. And that just talks about, that's all the bidding stuff. You have to, you can't seek or accept assistance from a contractor in preparing a request for proposals or qualifications, and then have that same contractor bid on getting the assessment work. So you can't, more practically, you can't have, it's okay to have a contractor help you, or an environmental consultant help you put together your grant proposal. That's one thing. But when it comes down, say you receive the award, and when it comes time to solicit for the grant, for the environmental consultant who's going to help you do your phase 1 and phase 2 assessments, you cannot have that contractor or any contractor help you put together your request for qualifications and then bid on that request for qualifications. So kind of keep that in mind. You can't include language that restricts or limits competition or gives a particular contractor an advantage. This was one thing in the guidance that we got that I was a little bit surprised with. It specifically calls out, and I've got a link to the guidance, or the guidance that I'm referring to is actually included in the resources section associated with this webinar. And it said that you can't require your contractor to have worked on US EPA Brownfields grants in the past. You have to allow the RFP to be open to additional contractors as well. Price must be a selection factor in the evaluation of your proposals or quotes. Usually what grantees will do is they'll have kind of a weighted evaluation, and price has to be a factor in that. And I think US EPA, we suggest 25% as the price be weighted at least 25%. Once again, the percentages are listed in the guidance that's in the resources section for this grant app, or for this webinar. Next slide, please. The next bullet just talks about the weighted factors in which the responses will be evaluated. So they're evaluated on a similar framework. And the RFQ, RFP must be publicly advertised on a website or through other means designed to promote full and open competition. You guys all know this. We recommend 30 days. It doesn't absolutely have to be 30 days, but it's in your best interest to leave the solicitations open for at least 30 days. Next slide, please. Construction. Another thing that is a little bit new this year, and this is all coming about because of some Davis-Bacon Act training we've had, and the BABA, Build America, Buy America, or Buy America, Build America requirements. When you put together your budget, and this is relevant to multi-purpose grants and cleanup grants. When you put together your budget, if you're doing active remediation, those costs need to go on the construction budget line item. In the past, we've allowed the whole cleanup to be put into under contractual, because you have a contract for once you get the cleanup contractor on board, you issue a contract, but you need to separate that out into construction and contractual. If you have questions about the budget, you can give me a call up until the time like the grant guidelines come out. But make sure you look at the guidelines. There'll be information in the proposal guidelines that addresses construction. And the FY24 FAQs, frequently asked questions, has additional information on construction and how we want to see that presented in the budget. And I've got a link to our FAQs.
Carla?
Yeah.
Jenny Carter Cornell has a question in the chat. It says, can you confirm our understanding that consultants post-grant award can't assist with preparing the work plan for the recipients too?
Oh, the cooperative agreement work plan? That's kind of a gray area. it's best that they don't, because the cooperative agreement work plans are actually very, very easy to put together. So I would say do not have the consultant put together the work plan. The work plan essentially mirrors the grant proposal. So you can have a consultant help you put together a grant proposal. And US EPA we have example work plans on our websites, and we actually send example work plans to all of our grantees once the grants are awarded. So I would say, to be safe, do not have your consultant help you with your cooperative agreement work plan. Like I said, those are pretty easy documents to put together.
Thanks, Carla.
Sure. Next slide, please. We're getting near the end here. Okay, well, we have multiple kinds of grants out there. And I just wanted to, I wanted to provide this slide and then the next one, which shows, like, if you apply for a multi-purpose grant, what other grants are you allowed to apply for? So these charts, the next two charts, these two charts will be included in the grant proposal guidelines when they come out, but I wanted to get them to you ahead of time. So if you apply for a multi-purpose grant, it just makes sense. You can't come in for assessment money through another type of grant, because you might get awarded both those grants, because the same person does not, the same reviewers don't review every proposal from from the same, like all the proposals from one entity don't get reviewed by the same people. So anyway, I wanted to give this to you just for reference as you're trying to decide what kind of grants you want to apply for. And then the next slide, please. This next slide, this is specific to entities that already have an existing cleanup or an existing US EPA Brownfields grant. So, one thing you'll notice here that I do want to point out, and then I'm going to close down unless there's other questions. One thing I wanted to note is, like, say, for instance, the yellow boxes, like a multi-purpose grantee, somebody who currently has a multi-purpose grant cannot apply for a multi-purpose grant in FY24 unless they've drawn down at least 70% of the current multi-purpose grant that they have. And when I say drawn down, I mean actually not committed, not obligated, but actually drawn down the money from US EPA. Our database or our mechanism for drawdowns is ASAP, and it's literally like an ATM. You put in your submission, say, I want the, I've got not receipts, I'm drawing a blank on the term, but anyway, I've got bills for X amount of money. I need to draw this, a certain amount of money down to be able to pay these invoices, sorry. And you literally get your money within 24 hours. Those drawdowns have to have been completed by October 1st, 2024 or 2023, my bad, sorry. And that's it for me. Please use these two charts as for reference as you're trying to determine what grants you have. And if you have questions, up until the time the grant proposal guidelines come out, I am allowed to speak freely. After that, I'm only allowed to discuss threshold criterion with potential applicants. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Amy and Beth for our panel discussion.
Thanks, Carla. I've got a quick question for you too, with respect to a coalition. Can a city apply for a coalition and then the non-lead members be neighborhood associations?
No, municipalities are not eligible to be lead
right.
coalition members.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a big change. It happened last year, but it's a very big change.
Yeah, I forgot about that, but a county could.
Yes, a county could.
Okay. All right. Well, Excuse me, I'm getting ready to roll here. I'm going to shut off my video so I can actually give you a decent presentation, but we're going to do sections 1 and 2 of the grant narrative. Now, remember, these are funding year 23 guidelines that we'll be discussing. We don't have the others out yet, so there could be changes, just like Carla was speaking to. Next slide, please. So first, we want to do this quickly. Do you need an EPA grant? Many times you may not. You have to figure out what is the scope of your brownfield problem. Do you have multiple eligible sites or just one? What is your target area? What work is needed? Planning, assessment, cleanup. This is a national grant, right? So you're not applying for something within your state. So you have to kind of take seriously, there's going to be a lot more bells and whistles to that. And let me think here. And go to state of Ohio. Use their programs, build upon your brownfield experience, and then apply for an EPA grant. Next slide, please. So again, here are some things to think. If you're considering, these are things that you need now. Do you have a land use plan? Start gathering that kind of data. What are the community goals? With respect to brownfield impacts, do you have a target area defined? That's where those are the areas that you'll be focusing on in the grant. What is your geographic area? So geographic area used to be referred to as jurisdiction. Now a geographic area could be city limits. It could be a county-wide area, or it can be confined even further to, let's say, a river corridor. And that is your area, and then you'll have target areas within that river corridor, something that you can kind of give more information about, because those are the areas that you're going to be talking about brownfield impacts. Community-based partners. This is stuff that you need to have going now. Who are your community-based partners? Do lack of funds affect the quality of life, the economic development, the real estate development, housing in your community? Is there a history of disinvestment in the community? These are good points to bring out. Where would you get the funds otherwise? Because a lot of times EPA has viewed their funding as seed money to get your projects going. It's not the end all be all. Does the timing work for you? So let's say guidelines come out in September and you submit a grant in November, December. You're not going to hear anything about an award until the spring. And then the funds will not be, you won't be able to get to the funds until October 1st of 2024. So does the timing work? Have you worked with staff at your state brownfields programs? They're a very important partner in this endeavor. And it's really, you're showing off if you could say that you've participated in their programs. Next slide, please. So let's say you're going for it. As I mentioned earlier, funding year 24 guidelines will be released in September, but this is the time to start looking at the current guidelines, the ones that you have from last year. This is a good time to get a feel for that. Also, all the funding year 2023 grant applications are posted at the link below. Check out the successful grant applications for ideas and strategies and how they framed their issues, how they framed their solutions. Also, go to ksutab.org and select Tab Easy. It's your one-stop shop for your EPA grant applications, and we'll be talking more about that tomorrow. Next slide, please. Requirements to submit an application. I'm not going to go into huge detail here, but you do need to be able to submit your grant to grants.gov, which requires several steps: active sam.gov account, a unique entity identifier, and you have whoever submits the application is the one that gets funded. So you can't really say, well, I'm going after funds, but I'm going to let the county submit the grant. That won't work. That won't fly. You have to be the grantee that will take the funds. Next slide, please. So before the pen hits the paper, as I mentioned earlier, start looking at other successful grants and how they approached issues. And as Carla had mentioned, EPA can't assist you once guidelines are out except for threshold, but please contact us anytime and hopefully we'll have a good answer for you. As I mentioned earlier, organizing your community outreach, your input, determine which grant is best for you. That's another big piece. Next slide, please. So today we'll be talking about narrative ranking criteria. There's other pieces to the grant that are very important. There, of course, is several pieces to it that you have to really take a look at, especially threshold items. Take a look, but today for the just considering scoring, because this is the area of the grant that is scored, we'll be talking about that criteria. And today's I'm so sorry, it's really early for me, believe it or not. The project area description and community need sections are what we'll be discussing. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. Here are the types of grants from last year again. And as you see, the coalition members, that was a new component for last year. You have assessment, you have multi-purpose, you have cleanup and coalition. I believe that RLFs will not be offered this year. And here, if you take a look at this, you'll see that there may be different requirements for geographic areas or for target areas from one to another. So one size does not fit all here. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of a geographic boundary that is in white. And then the targeted area, they targeted a downtown district. And within those areas, that's where they plan to focus their grant activities. So if the geographic boundary is in your grant, your activities must be only in that geographic boundary. You can't step outside that line. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into these slides. I just wanted to make the point about EJ Screen, how important it is to your project description section. It helps you actually understand better what's going on in your target area, your geographic area. And it has indexes that environmental, socioeconomic, health, climate, critical service gaps. We're gonna have a great presentation on this tomorrow, so that's, I'm not gonna go with that. Next slide, please. Again, using the EJ screen for project description, you can be looking at a whole city, or you can also compare a block group where you're that's in your target area to the city statistics. Next slide, please. This is just city census data versus site census block group data. You can certainly see how things change in one area within the city. Unemployment rate, 9% in the city, but 12% in the target area. 49% for low income in the city, 69% in the block group. Next slide, please. But quantitative data is only good as the qualitative description of what it means. So this first paragraph I took from someone's application. It was general, but not as good because it needed to explain that data. They have census tracts identified as disadvantaged. They say where they get that information, but they don't compare it to anything. So it's hard to have context. And again, your reviewers may not be they may not know who you are, where you're located, what your issues are. So you really have to kind of give them perspective here on what you're writing. So then the second paragraph I thought did a much better description. And so painting that picture, really making the point, comparing data, I thought was more compelling. Next slide, please. And then description of the target area, the overview of brownfield challenges and description of target area. Clearly define the target areas. And I do want to back up on project description a bit. If you spend a whole page talking about the industrial history of your city or county, and then you don't define what the impacts clearly are in your target area, you're going to lose a lot of points. So don't focus so much on the big general picture, focus on the now and how. What's going on there now? How is your target area impacted by brownfields? High crime, unsafe properties, you name it. There's lots of different ways to do it. Next, and then on cleanup grants, you describe properties targeted for cleanup and known site contamination. That's something to keep in mind. So it's going to be different ranking, different grants. I believe I have a comment for this slide.
Hi, this is Jenny. I do have a comment, but I think maybe Kim wanted to jump in
Sure,
first.
I just noticed that, and it's hard for me to read the chat at the same time. I'm sorry, Kim. Should I back up on slides? Well, Jenny, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Well, I just wanted to reinforce what you've already stated and what we've heard a couple times already this morning, that it is so important to determine the appropriate target area or areas, as there are ripple effects of that decision in many components of the application, and that can affect your story and your scoring. So give yourself some time to think critically about this decision. And we worked with many communities in the past that knew they had many brownfields, but hadn't yet completed an inventory. And it's really hard to have a compelling story if you can't yet quantify the issues or describe the need. So as part of the application planning process, a community can at least complete a preliminary inventory just to get a sense of the type of sites and locations of their brownfields. And then as part of the grant funded activities, they can request funds to prepare a more comprehensive inventory and prioritization process. So this summer or early fall, communities can host public forums or complete electronic outreach to get input from their constituents on what sites they had in mind that the community should consider with their brownfield program. And then the people working on the application could also do some maybe quick reviews of some of the properties within the areas that they're thinking of targeting. And with that initial brownfield list, they could look at areas of like common areas of concentrated brownfields. They could look at areas around the road, a former railroad, or even current railroad, a river corridor, or another area that's logical boundaries. They can look at recent and past investments, strategic plans, and other activities and conditions that could demonstrate significant need while showing opportunities for improvements and shifting momentum that could be advanced through this grant.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
And I do
Yeah,
want,
I'd like to comment as well, please.
sure, and yours was on the choice of a grant,
Yes,
showing the four different types of grant. And can you tell me about your experience? And
Yes.
you might mention who you're with.
yes, I'm Kim Kimlin. I'm with the Cuyahoga Land Bank. We're a nonprofit that serves all of Cuyahoga County. And the largest city in Cuyahoga County is Cleveland. So last year, we collaborated with the city of Cleveland and Cuyahoga County government in determining which kind of grant to pursue. Basically, in the past, over the past like 12 years or so, these three entities have kind of taken turns applying for the grants and managing them. And we had grants in 2010, I think 2015 and 2019, but we kind of had gotten out of our rotation. The county decided when it was their turn, they hadn't applied a couple of years ago. And then I think nobody applied a year, and then we applied 2 years in a row. Anyhow, the rotation had fallen apart. So right after this training last year, the three bodies convened a series of weekly meetings through August, where we kind of shared notes about what we'd learned in the training, and tossed around, you know, who were the eligible applicants this time, who were eligible to be coalition members, what were the target area requirements, what were the focus areas. And then after 3 meetings, we really decided amongst the 3 entities that the best applicant would be the city of Cleveland. And then our organization provided some technical assistance to the city in preparing their application. So anyhow, the lesson learned is it was very effective having those conversations. We weren't competing with each other. We were just trying to figure out what would bring the most, who was the most likely to win a grant. You have to really focus on which entity can win the grant based on all the criteria. And so I would encourage people that have are in communities where there might be multiple applicants to collaborate with them and just try to figure out the best model structure for the grant that will result in a winning application. The city did get their grant, so that all did work out great. And I just encourage people to start early in those conversations.
And I encourage our participants today to reach out to any of the panelists that you have questions about their thoughts. And then we're going to skip to the next slide, please. And description of priority sites. Again, you know, different conditions here. Why is your site a priority? Where is it located? What about potential contaminant impacts to your site? And then look at your other factors here on the slide. And I have a comment on this slide as well.
Yeah, this is Kim again. And I wanted to talk about, just to highlight an example. For our 2019 grant application, we contacted a local conservancy organization called West Creek Conservancy, which is focused on a number of things, but one of them is protecting waterways, including the West Creek. West Creek flows into the Cuyahoga River, which flows into Lake Erie. So for our 2019 grant, we partnered with them because it seemed to be a really good fit that year, because that year, the other factors that EPA were considering were whether the property was adjacent to a body of water. And another factor that year was whether 30% or more of your overall grant budget would be spent on reuse planning. And that's exactly what West Creek Conservancy wanted to do for a landfill, for a closed landfill that was on a slope hanging basically over the West Creek. And they wanted to do both a reuse plan for that particular site, as well as sort of a guideline for a number of other landfills along those waterways. And that, so what the work products ended up being the reuse plan for the particular landfill. And we also had a guide to Ohio landfills prepared that really can be used by any community in Ohio that wants to try to figure out if they can do some kind of redevelopment of those sites.
Oh, that'd be great if you could share that with us,
Sure.
just so people have a model. If you share that with us, we'll post it in the resources. Okay.
Happy to.
All right, next slide. We'll have to move pretty quickly here so we can stay on our timeline. Next slide, please. Yeah. Descriptions of your priority brownfields are very important. This is only an excerpt, but I thought the description was very good. And it did go on and on, but at least it tells you where 2 parcels bordered on the north and south, owned by the city. I guess my questions would be, all right, is this a building? How big is the building? What's the square footage? Next slide, please. And then reuse should align with challenges presented in the section. Again, we have Kim on this, and Kim will have to keep them kind of brief if possible. Your comments.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what I was going to talk about here. Hang on a second.
Oh, that's okay.
I was going to say something.
Does somebody else have comments?
Oh, yeah, this was a comment. It's sort of a cautionary comment because we did fill out an application, I think, and we got the 2019 grant. 2 years later, we deployed enough of it that we were able to apply again. And we did not get that grant. That was for 2021, I guess. And what you can do is if you don't get a grant, afterwards you can meet, have a call with one of the reviewers and they can tell you like kind of where you went wrong. And it was interesting because we had put in a target area in Cleveland that had a plan developed for, it was called, I think, the Forgotten Triangle area. And there had been a plan developed, which the City Planning Commission had been involved in, and a local CDC. And so we thought when we talked about the plan that was, kind of how that related to the government land use plan, that we referenced that plan, that sort of granular plan. And the reviewer said to us, no, we were really looking for like the city-wide plan that it supported. So don't get too granular when you talk about these plans. It sounded like the EPA was really looking for how does it support really the citywide land use plan or citywide revitalization plan.
Interesting. Okay. On the slide also, the cleanup, if you note how public and project partners, you need to include your underserved communities are involved in the development of the reuse strategy, projected reuse of a site. That's an important piece. Next slide, please. Here are some examples: revitalization of a target area. I mean, this to me, I felt like was lacking because do those reuse strategies here align with environmental justice, climate action, and community resilience? And I believe Dan has a comment.
Yeah, Dan Cholker here, excuse me, with the Ohio EPA lead brownfield coordinator. And we applied for a statewide assessment grant 2 years ago, and we had 3 target areas. 2 of our target areas were villages, very small communities, Bel Air and Newcomerstown. And I'll just briefly highlight, they had just some basic plans that they had put together, and we had assisted Bel Air with a vision plan. Just kind of giving a vibrant, walkable downtown was kind of the vision they were looking at, and connectivity from a recreational perspective with this regional iconic structure, the viaduct, as it is known. It's basically a bridge over the floodplain in Ohio River, built back in the 1870s. And there's a Viaduct Society who had a plan for that project as well as leveraging ODOT, the Department of Transportation funding to make improvements on that trail. And the brownfield is associated with some of the past railroad activities on a parcel adjacent to the viaduct. And so not only are you looking at plans, but any other activities or planned opportunities or funded projects are something you can also mention in your application. And then briefly at Newcomerstown, they had a 10-year strategic plan, and we were targeting a specific old manufacturing property that was about 36 acres in size, and they portioned out that property for recreational use, since there were some water features and along a river. And so they had a Department of Natural Resources paddle grant to install a boat ramp. And then they had other sidewalk funding. And their plan is to put multi-use senior housing on the remainder of the property. And that property is currently going through assessment, but that is part of the overall vision that was part of our application.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Thank you. Next slide, please. Focus on the outcomes and benefits that will take place in the target area, benefit your underserved populations as well as the community at large. Let's see, my comments are, one comment I have were the new the guidelines from last year about displacement of residents. And I believe Carla really touched on that too. What is your strategy or policy to be implemented to minimize displacement? Important piece. Next slide, please. And strategy for leveraging resources. Lots of ways to leverage. And one resource you can leverage, or two resources you can always leverage, are with the Ohio EPA. Any of the programs that you've been involved with, or how you might, especially if it's cleanup, how are you going to leverage your cleanup if you're doing an assessment grant? And the same with the TAB program. You can use, we can send you a letter if you have worked with us through the year, let's say in a community outreach plan. We can send you something quantifying that time and amount of funding. So there's lots of ways and strategies. And I think I have a quick comment here for this slide.
Yes, Dan Scholker again. There is a resource for the webinar that's been provided. It's the Common Brownfield Funding Sources in Ohio. That's a good resource to identify various programs that can act as match or a possible future outcome. And in particular, the $350 million funding from through the Department of Development can, as Carla previously alluded to, could be part of a match component for a cleanup project, or it could be an end result for your assessment program that you will be leveraging these cleanup dollars that the state has available. Department of Development also has the gas station program, has been around for a number of years. So for those abandoned gas stations, that's another good resource. I briefly talked about DNR. They have Clean Ohio Trail funding that's been around for years. Their state historic preservation tax credits. And even ODOT, there's other funding available throughout these other programs we're always trying to keep track of. And ARC is more of a national or regional area. Appalachian Regional Commission and EDA have grants often associated with end use. So again, just look for those resources and leveraging opportunities out there. And we have a few that we did provide.
Yeah, and I think one important thing, I see this, can the match be assistance already received? Actually, the leveraging section is really about your targeted area and your project that you're submitting to the EPA. So if you were leveraging, let's say, a community outreach plan that TAB has helped you work through, we can help you quantify that for the up and coming grant. You can also talk about your success in leveraging resources, right? So let's say you did have phase one done through the OEPA TBA program. That should be something that where you're talking about your success in the past, talk about how you have leveraged these resources in the past, how you intend to leverage those resources through the term of the grant. So sorry, I might have gotten carried away with that. So I'm going to flip through these very quickly. We really are short on time. Next slide, please. Use of existing infrastructure. You know, what infrastructure needs or upgrades will be required to meet project goals. Let's go to the next slide. This is an example of existing infrastructure. Oh, they've got it made. They don't need anything. To me, that's kind of a red flag. You mean you don't need stormwater controls? You don't have the developer doing certain things like lighting or sidewalks. These are all things you can talk about that's going to be improved and have other people improve them. It's not really always on the city or the community. Next slide, please. Cleanup grants. These are strategy for leveraging resources. If you're applying for a cleanup grant, it'd be a good idea to go through these slides again and take a look at them. And next slide. I believe that's the end, and I'm passing it to Amy. And sorry, Amy, we had a lot of comments. So let's get going.
Okay, thanks, Beth. We can go to the next slide. And I'm going to talk about Section 2, community need and community engagement, and kind of a running theme throughout my presentation is going to be details. If you're talking about what you need, be detailed and provide data, good, descriptive, narrative, so on and so forth. Next slide. Stepping right into it, this is a community need from a grant that did not get an award. They talked a little bit about how they had a lower or how population decreased by 10,000 in the 2010 census. And they kind of hint on disparities between the county and the target areas for income percentage, people in poverty, medium value housing. If you could click 2 more times, Maggie. Yeah. This is a work in progress. I don't want to say it's bad. It just needs more. What about connecting that loss in population? You really need to connect things like loss in population, low income, to taxes, to what you as a municipality or a grant applicant is seeing, and why you need extra money. Why can't your money cover this that you already get from taxes and other? So give some figures. We want percentages. We want dollars. We want more than just a number of people that has been lost since last census. What's the county budget used for? Are there other priorities? So mention your priorities. Do you have safety issues, public safety issues? Do you need, county roads repaved? Do you need improvements in your wastewater treatment plant? So on and so forth. So those dollars may be earmarked for other things. Let the grant reviewers know that, so that they clearly can understand your need. Also, something to point out, and Carla has alluded to this as well as Beth, there are places within the FY23 guidance, and I expect FY24, where you will get quite a reduction in points if you don't mention things such as the need for funding isn't due to small population or low income. Losing 3 points is huge in this competitive application process. So make sure you're aware of those things. Next slide. So here's some that I thought was pretty good, a language that was actually awarded a grant. Limited population and subsequent tax varies hinder the ability. I'd like to see either percentages or dollars there. But I thought they did a really good job with how much their police force and fire department bite into the budget. Also recent inflation, we all know it's hit us hard. So those are good things to mention if that has affected you. Next slide. Oh yeah, this is good. Next slide. So Beth mentioned this. Lucy Stanfield from US EPA will discuss this tomorrow. Use of EJ Screen. It provides you with a wealth of data. So when you're looking at threats to sensitive populations, you know, particularly environmental justice issues, this is an excellent tool. And like I said, Lucy will give us a really good overview of it tomorrow. There's also a climate and environmental justice tool out there, and that can provide some additional helpful data as well. With that, we'll move on. Next slide. The other thing, as well as pointing out good resources like EJ Screen, don't forget with your sensitive populations, you have 3 categories in section 2 to describe how the grant will address or facilitate the identification and reduction of threats to those different populations. So you want to say, you know, this is going to either address contamination, identify contamination that can be addressed, that sort of thing that's going to help things like chronic disease rates. A lot of times people will do an excellent job in covering their sensitive populations, but they'll leave this out. Don't do it. So you'll lose points. Next slide. So community need, health and welfare. This is one from a non-successful application. So they're talking about abandoned and unaddressed brownfield sites in the target area. These populations in these areas have greater health risks than the general population from 2 brownfield source contaminants in the area. If you could click on that 2 more times, Maggie. Okay, so it's a work in progress. It's a good, you know, explanation, but what about the percentage of children and elderly and minorities? We want to see those details. You know, the reviewers don't want to just rely on it or take your word for it. We want to know that you've looked this up and made that just, you know, determination. Also comparing them is really good. Compare to city, state, and US values, depending on, you know, what is your geographic area and target area. What is a general population? That doesn't really mean anything. Don't use, you know, I hate to say it general terms for general population, but don't use general terms. They don't provide any information. You need to give specifics. And how will the grant address these threats? As I mentioned, that's left out here. So next slide. So here's one from a applicant that was awarded a grant, and they get into the percentages of their sensitive populations, give percentages, and things such as in children when compared to the state or US statistics, they're a lot higher. Be nice to have the state or US statistics, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And they talk about the diversity of their target area. The other thing which I didn't highlight, which I thought was really good, is how they how this would address, the grant would address these issues. And it says our grant project will help these sensitive populations by analyzing for lead paint and asbestos in older buildings. Both contaminants affect minorities and youth disproportionately. So you want to, you know, tie that really well to what your statistics are. Next slide. Oh, and then, and again, I mentioned tables. Actually, I tend to recommend these. You know, narrative is good, but you can do a nice table with a very brief narrative and it can say a heck of a lot. And it can do it in you're probably a little less, possibly, you know, space in your 10-page or whatever your limit may be. So you can see here how in the target area, the percent minority is a lot larger than the county, the state, and the US, and for other things such as poverty level and home value. And you can also use this. I've seen people comparing percentiles from EJ Screen in here as well. That's also very helpful. Next slide. And this is greater than normal incidence of disease and adverse health effects. I forgot to put that there. And this is the second sensitive population category. So again, table gives you a nice way of looking at the target area versus the state in the US. One thing, this data should be specific to your target area. Sometimes with disease and adverse health effects, that is not possible. And you can say that if it isn't. Sometimes it's just countywide, but often there are ways to get local information, and we'll talk a little bit about more about that tomorrow. One thing I'll point out, again, earning less points. They have mentioned, the EPA mentions in the guidelines, cancer, asthma, and birth defects. This was the 23 guidelines, of course. And if you didn't include at least one of them, you would only earn 2 out of 5 points, which is not good. That's a big loss. And I believe, Jenny, did you have comments on this?
I just had a little bit of a perspective I wanted to share. For those of you who prepared these applications many years ago, but maybe not in the last few years, this section is so much more straightforward to research and prepare than in years past, thanks to the public databases and user-friendly programs available now. We used to spend hours and hours sifting through reports, but typically could only find that data on a countywide or municipal level. And we often lost points in this section because the statistics weren't tied to a particular area. So it is a lot easier, and I don't dread this section nearly as much as I used to.
Great, thank you. That's it has become a lot easier. And for those of you who are down on the ground doing that, I didn't look forward. I didn't want to be you at that point in time. It's tough, but there is a lot more data out there and a lot more accessible. Thanks, Jenny. Next slide. So promoting environmental justice. I think Carla hit on this as a very, very important topic in the past, but also for FY24 and what we're likely to see in the guidelines. It is basically, if you want to boil it down, environmental justice is, you think about your industrial areas and your community, oftentimes the people that live close to them are probably a higher minority, higher poverty rate, a higher number of single mothers, those sorts of sensitive type populations. On top of that, they often, because this is a depressed neighborhood, have inadequate access to healthy food, so food deserts. Public transportation isn't as good, including transportation not only to jobs, but to where you can get good, healthy food. And on top of that, they have more pollution exposure because of where they're located. So this is trying to reverse some of these historical inequities, if you might say. And there are a lot of examples in the frequently asked questions. This is the FY23 that I'm showing the access to, but there'll be an FY24 as well. Next slide. So promoting environmental justice. This is a grant that was awarded. It goes into a lot of description of the 4 target area census tracts. In fact, that they were 95th to 100th percentile for following categories, and they go through those. What I liked in this is the target area. They spend some time talking about education. Not enrolled in higher education, there's a large number of folks, and in this case 100%, not attaining a high school diploma, those sorts of things that may impact this EJ community's ability to find good jobs, good paying jobs. And the second highlight, the city hopes to leverage this assessment grant towards job training grant, another EPA Brownfields grant that would focus on training target area residents in brownfield assessment and remediation related positions. Again, this is just integrally, I should say, tied to what the problem is, or one of the big problems in that area, the lack of education and skills and what they might do with it as far as leveraging. Next slide. Community engagement. You have to name some partners. They usually put that in a table in your Brownfield grant. Here's a number of people that would be able to be your partners, good, and partners that will provide not only expertise, but maybe some assistance for your Brownfield grant. And don't forget things like your county extension office, church and neighborhood groups. Again, Carla hit on this fact that you really want to get these local groups in and also get community participation, neighborhood participation. Very important. EPA puts a lot of priority on that. TAP can also be a provider or a help, and we can do things like help you with either visioning meetings, maybe public meetings where we might do some facilitation, things like that. Next slide. So project roles, this is part of the grant, and this was a successful grant. And you mention your partners, your point of contact, and you talk about what their role is going to be in the project. And you want to have a good, the quality of the partnerships is more important than the quantity. You do want to have somebody that's going to provide you with some expertise and maybe some work, so to speak, like in this instance, they'll assist with site identification, community engagement, and reuse planning. So you want those partners that are going to provide you with, help. But also don't forget those neighborhood groups as well, because the help they're going to provide you with is getting the neighborhood to the table or to the meetings, which can be hard, as Carla mentioned. Next slide. So this is a chart that Beth puts together oftentimes when she's helping out a community that's looking for a grant, looking at different sites, different target areas that might be helpful for their grant. And one of these is community-based organizations. And I just wanted to point this out because if you do something like this, obviously there are already identified, and this would be something done pre-grant application, already identified community-based organizations already identified if you're going to use that target area and or property. So it'll help you with identifying good partners. Next slide. Incorporating community input. And again, you're going to describe your plan. If you have engaged the public in the past, where there's successful approaches to these methods, mention the successes and in your narrative and how you will use them for this project. So, if you've done some good stuff, mention it and, give some specifics. And again, we talk about having the community-based organizations. Again, how will you provide effective and appropriate means to communicate the grant project progress and solicit and consider community input? I think most of you know by now, EPA places, whether it's brownfields or Superfund or anything else, a large, quite a bit of importance on getting community input, soliciting it, and considering it. Maybe not necessarily incorporating it or using it, but you need to consider it because there obviously could be some really good things there. So I do have, I think, was it Jenny or Dan that had a comment here?
Well, I did. I'm not sure if Dan did. I just wanted to mention that applicants should say that they can convert project information materials to other languages upon request, and mention the service, university, or other source they will use. And if they have a large population of citizens in the community or a target neighborhood that predominantly speaks other languages, consider offering materials in those languages in addition to English. We have one client that automatically transfers all their documents into Spanish because they have such a large Spanish speaking population in their target areas.
Great.
And
That's
also,
really
yeah,
great. Oh, go ahead, Dan, sorry.
sorry, just for sake of time, I'll just briefly mention, we took advantage of a community survey in our vision planning that we assisted the village of Bel Air. And so a community survey was marketed through a video and then through social media. So we had a pretty good participation from the community to get information from their opinions from the community. And there's also scanning the QR code at restaurants and businesses was another way for people to get directly linked to the online survey that was done. So just wanted to highlight that.
Oh, no, that was really good because I did see this. I think that was brought out in our last webinar, and that was just got an amazing amount of public participation. Really, really good in Bel Air. Next slide. Just real quick, incorporating community input, and you can click it 2 more times, Maggie. So the main thing was here is they're not specific about who will respond to the input or who will consider the input and who will respond to it. So you do need to make sure that you cover those areas. Next slide. And here's one that did cover these areas. Community involvement plan will be created to describe the plan, schedule, community engagement activities, and project background and key players. So they give all the details. That's good. And they really go in the next highlighted area where they expect input at meetings, over the phone, online, so on and so forth. And they'll respond to all comments, questions, and requests posed by citizens in meetings or via online publication and within 2 weeks of receipt. That's, going above and beyond, I would say, as far as the responding, within a certain amount of time. But you do want EPA to know that you are going to, you have a plan for, considering these and deciding what to do with them. With that, I will pass. Oh, next slide. Incorporating public input. It is a two-way street. People sometimes will kind of dread this because they think, citizens are going to be mad or it's going to be chaotic, so on and so forth. Don't go into it that way. Go into it and plan it with the idea that it is going to be beneficial. And one of the benefits you as the applicant are going to get out of it is the better you do, the more invested the citizens are going to be in this project. And if they're invested, they're going to be helpful and they're going to be supportive. So don't forget that. And keep your engagement through the grant period going. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to move on to the next slide. We're starting into our group exercise. Next slide. So we're going to break out into working groups. You're going to find out in a few minutes. Maggie's going to break you into different working groups depending on how many people are on the webinar. So we kind of have an even number. You will have a facilitator. It'll be either Beth or I or some of the panel members. And each working group will review one narrative ranking criteria in a particular grant. There were 2 grants that were in your resource section, Lima and Cleveland. If you haven't had a chance to read those, we will give you time to read those within this group exercise, and then we will score these. And one of the things you'll need to do is assign a lead. The facilitator will be the timekeeper, and they'll be the ones kind of walking through slides. They'll share those facilitator slides and help you with the, run you through the scoring. Just one thing, when reviewing, carefully consider how well the grantee does, tying their story together with their narrative. As Beth mentioned early on, what you talk about in section 1, what your project is, what your target area, geographic areas, problems are, needs to flow through the whole grant. Don't go mentioning other sites, in section 2 or 3 or whatever, after you've talked about certain priority sites. Next slide. So what you'll have, what's in the resources, is section 5, the narrative review information. This is contained in the guidelines, FY23 guidelines for the community-wide assessment grants. Both of these are community-wide. And that gives you what essentially the scoring is and what the reviewers, the EPA reviewers, consider. Also within that guideline is section 4, which is what you read and respond to when you're preparing a grant. And like I said, there's 2 different grant applications. There's one for Lima and there is one for Cleveland. They're both successful grant applications. So, they should be mostly good, but there might be room for improvement. So don't keep that in mind. Next slide. So here's what you want to consider. Narrative being clearly and concisely written, factual responses. Don't leave any criterion blank. If it doesn't apply, say that. Be very clear. Sufficient detail. And do they provide data from things like Census, EJ Screen, or other data sources like CGEST and such? You want percentages and percentiles, not generalities, as I mentioned, no general population. You want to get into the specifics. Did they provide a response to all the information? Make sure the applicant used the sample format tables in the guidelines. There are sample format tables. If they didn't, and that's fine, that's not required. Just make sure they included all the information that the sample tables show. And consistency, as I mentioned before, is absolutely essential. And I think that's the last one, Maggie. I think we can start putting everybody in rooms. And am I able to share my screen, Maggie, real quick for our report out?
Yeah, just give me a sec.
Oh, okay. Because we and Joshua and Sarah are going to give our report out. So, oh, sorry, did I?
Nope, you should be good to go.
Okay. Here we go. So, Sarah, do you want to give it a start?
Sure. Okay, to kind of introduce the project, we had a site that was for Cleveland, and we gave it 5 points for the community's need for funding because they did a really good job of identifying and relaying to the reviewer that it is a disadvantaged community with all the charts and bolding and underline of the key points that show that it is disadvantaged. So there, I'll pass it on.
Yeah, and overall, they were very good about referring to the requirements, making sure that the targeted language in the criteria is met. They had a table referring to the asthma, diabetes, and heart disease that's experienced or shown for the national percentages, but also for target area. They also have reference to the 2014 to 2018 cancer incidence rate for Cuyahoga Valley being higher than that of the Ohio and the US rate. They had tables on income, unemployment, education, racial and age breakdown, showing the percentages for Cuyahoga, for Cleveland, and showing that they are truly in an area that is in great need of these kind of grants, and also discussing how they have, due to their high percentage of Black women in Cuyahoga Valley, they have a higher risk of premature births and birth defect that may result of that compared to other areas of the United States. They had a great table about the community engagement, about their points of contacts, about what each organization is and their involvement in the project, as well as having information about how they're going to be having 5 community education meetings, 5 community vision meetings, as well as doing community outreach in the form of door knocking, newsletters, press releases, and news stories to really incorporate the community's input. So overall, they did a great job of meeting the criteria, resulting in a score of 36 out of 40.
Yeah, they were just missing a few things with the health and welfare of sensitive populations. Just for further edification, they, did give percentage of Black pregnant women, but not as not percentages of the other groups. So that was just a little off. And then, Josh, do you remember with promoting environmental justice, they did a nice job with their table, but I think there was something missing that you had noted.
I'm sorry, that thought must have exited my mind if that was me.
Yeah. Well, we'll come up with it later, but we probably should move on. Beth, were you group number 2?
All I know is I may have been, I probably was. Yes, Amy, I was. And we did section 1, project description. And we have Chelsea that's going to report our findings. Thank you, Chelsea.
Yeah, and Beth, do you have the scoring sheet that you can pull up that we're looking at that may help when I'm referencing some of these things?
Sure, that I will say that on the very first target area, that was 4 out, we gave it 4 out of 5. So sorry, I should have.
Oh, no, yeah, I knew time ran out near the end, so we didn't, I think, come up with a total score, but I think we'll get to that maybe once I'm done with this discussion. But anyone feel free in the group to, I guess, step up and say anything if I forget something. So we had the Lima, or the city of Lima. So kind of that first section talking about the target area. We did give it a 4 out of 5. I think where it was lacking and the reason we gave it a 4 was we kind of expected to see maybe more details of the target area itself. It kind of spread out over a 6-mile plus radius. And they didn't really maybe go into as much detail if these, kind of, if the properties were located, say, in a downtown district, commercial district, and as such. So that's kind of what we were looking for there. And then they did discuss some of Lima's, more kind of like long history of Lima, but it may have been lacking some of the more recent history in regards to any kind of blighted or, areas of poverty. And then I believe the next section, Beth, was 1A II, which was the description of brownfields.
Yes, and the group gave them a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, and I think overall it did pretty well describing the brownfield properties themselves, but we thought that it may have been lacking kind of discussion more of the area population or the community members that would be directly impacted for the target areas.
Yes. And
Yeah.
maybe some other details in terms of if you have a building, what's the size of the building, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can do revitalization of the target area just as one lump sum here, if you'd like. And that was, we gave that an 8 out of 10. So reuse strategy and then the outcomes and benefits.
Yeah, they didn't so much talk about the economic benefit of, job creation. They're doing a lot of work. They talked about creating a community center. But they didn't really discuss, who will it serve in the community? Is it going to be, more of a youth center, an overall community center for, everyone in the entire community? So we just figured, we took off a point or two for that. I'm trying to think, am I missing anything else on that
Outcomes
section?
and benefits of the reuse strategy. Does anybody remember how that was ranked? I didn't take those notes, so I think you summed it up pretty well there on revitalization. And now we'll go to strategy for leveraging resources. The total score, wow, we didn't add it up. So
yeah, I think this was our lowest score.
yeah.
Yeah, I know near the part of the application where they discussed kind of their existing infrastructure and how well it was suited for their redevelopment and use of the funding, we didn't feel was very holistic, I guess. They talked about how their roads, water and sewer, everything was fine and they had no problems. And we were starting to rattle off, what about the lighting in the neighborhood or in the areas of these sites, and any other sort of infrastructure like public transportation, they seem to have been lacking. And I know, Beth, you had mentioned about best management practices when it comes to like stormwater permits, and when the construction is going on, they kind of left that discussion or that part of it out. So we had ranked that one, I believe, a 3 out of 5. And then I think we're undecided on the other section and kind of got cut off. So I don't have the greatest notes for that. But I believe we were going to rank, that one was out of a 10. And I think we decided on it like a 6 to 7.
Probably
I believe.
7, yeah.
Yeah.
Probably closer to a 7.
Mhm.
I will also mention on the infrastructure that Erskine had mentioned, the technology piece. What about
yeah.
the internet? Do you have all that in place now? And if you do, say so, but if you don't, then Jenny had a great idea that maybe you should do sort of an infrastructure study that you can pay for with a grant. So great ideas from the group here. I think that's all we had. Amy?
Okay. Well, that sounds good. And then who had a group after that? I want to say Dan.
Yes, we had City of Lima, Section 2. And Richard will report out for the group.
Richard, I think you're on mute.
Well, it looks like he has a microphone.
Oh, yep, Richard.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was talking for a minute there. Apologies. So quick summary. The applicant was community-wide assessment grant for 15 properties. Our group decided that they did address the needs for funding, a classic Ohio industrial community. All the companies left and abandoned buildings with possible asbestos and lead, with impoverished and impact EJ40 community. So first one, they did address the needs for funding. So we gave 5 full points for that one. And then going into the community needs and community engagement for threats to sensitive populations. For the first one, we did say they addressed the welfare and the sensitive populations, but they mentioned food stamps, but there was no line of connection between that. It wasn't mentioned anywhere else. It was just almost a filler, which isn't, I mean, it's important. Food stamps could be a useful statistic, but they didn't go anywhere with it. So we gave them 4 points for that one. And then going into disease and adverse health conditions, they were thorough, and they mentioned all those target areas, excuse me. So we applied the 5 points full for that one. And then lastly, for the EJ promoting environmental justice, we all agreed that if we have to ask a question, they provided the statistics to support that this is a environmental justice community with adverse populations, but they didn't state it outright as a first sentence that, hey, this meets the criteria using this environmental justice site. We kind of had to read into the statistics. And a side note, they bolded all the answers, quote unquote, for these questions, which became easier to read, but also it kind of added too much as well, like navigating through the actual application. So we gave it 7 points out of 10 for that one. So we did dock them for that because they didn't outright say it met the EJ40. And then going into the last 3 points, project involvement and project roles. I noticed a theme that a table is used. They did also acquire a table and provided grassroots, which Carla mentioned is a good buzzword. Local profit, nonprofit, grassroots, community organizations is key for these applications. So we awarded 5 points for those. And then for the last bit, community input, they also addressed ways they're going to engage the community members. We did award them 5 points, but we were hoping, or maybe for future applications, that they could show maybe past success stories or a possible, like, hey, we already have a strong community engagement with other activities that could help support that there will be a good turnout for community input. So our score in total is 37 out of 40, if I did that correctly.
Good. That was a great report out. And who was our last group? Was it you, Jenny? Or Lisa?
It was my group. We had section 2 of Cleveland's grant, and Mary Mahaffey is going to do our report out.
Great.
Yeah, so we rated the first section a 4 out of 5. We wished we could give them a 4.5 out of 5. We didn't know if that was allowed, but we just wish that they would go a little bit more into depth about how this grant would help alleviate some of the crime that they talked about, because those rates were pretty high. But other than that, it was really good. The next section, we gave them a 5 out of 5 because we felt like they really covered all of their bases. Like I know Sarah's group talked about earlier, how they talked about how heart disease and diabetes was mentioned, and they gave really good statistics. And we liked how they technically like underlined and bolded a lot of those statistics and facts and kind of got their point across. So that one we gave a 5 out of 5. And then the next section, 2A-II, we gave them a 4 out of 5 because we wish that they had talked about more of the physical hazards that are also going on in the community. They talked a lot about like the physical diseases that are going on, but there could have been mention of something like, well, is there a dry cleaner in the area that may have impacted contamination levels, and that could be a source of disease as well. And then 2A-II, that was the 10-point section. We gave them a 7 out of 10. While they did do a really good job like explaining everything, we kind of wish that they focused less on the clean energy aspect of it and went more into like the jobs that are going to be created and how to raise like graduation rates and other things such as that. And then the next sections, 2BI and 2BII, we both gave those a 4 out of 5 because there seemed to be a lot of overlap in between how these organizations would be assigned roles. Like there was a lot of community engagement, but it wasn't really specific on what kind of community engagement, which organization would be doing. So while they did like check all the boxes and filled out the table correctly, we wish they went more specific. And then the last one, 2BII, we gave them a 5 out of 5. They could have shortened up their technical language a bit, but they went over and above with all the things that they were going to do for community outreach. And in total, that ended up being a 33 out of 40.
Great. That was a really good report outs. We learned a lot of stuff today, and hopefully you all that participated, learned a lot and felt more comfortable with the whole grant process, especially if you're going to be applying for a grant. Just to let you know, since section 4 tomorrow is rather small comparatively, we will all be reviewing section 3. You kind of want to familiarize yourself and have a chance to look at that. So that will be the report out, the group exercise tomorrow. And with that, I'm going to pass this on to Beth.
All right. Okay. Well, here's the agenda for tomorrow. I need to make my screen bigger so I can see things. We've got a great lineup. Of course, Roxanne, hopefully she'll be back in. We'll do a welcome, but we have the EJ Screen and CGest session with Lucy Stanfield, and it's very, very helpful, I think, for you. Then we'll go over the Tab Easy tool. It's really just the basics, just getting you started. And then the panel presentation again. We'll be talking about sections 3 and 4 with discussion, group exercise, and then at the end, writing a strong proposal. And Amy will be doing that. Again, optional working sessions for those interested in applying for a Brownfields grant. When you have some questions, we're offering 30-minute sessions. They do not have to be right after the workshop. They can be scheduled at a more convenient time if you need, but I highly recommend those. And then we assign our tab folks to be part of that, and Ohio EPA. So with that in mind, next slide, please. Feedback, feedback, feedback. Please do the survey. Next slide, please. Final housekeeping. These are some things. If you join by phone, email chsr@ksu.edu with your full name. Recording will be ready in a week. Tell us how we did on the survey, and I'll leave you with the survey slide. Actually, I'm not. I'm telling you who what our contact information is, and please give us a call. Call Tab for any services, and we have posted on the resources what the region, what services we commonly provide in EPA Region 5. Those might be very interesting to you as you're getting ready to write your grant application. And don't forget that we do grant reviews. You have to give us a bit of time, maybe a couple days to get that done. So don't wait until the last minute. It may not happen, but they're usually very good reviews. And then you can even ask for a second review if you've made changes. Next slide, please. And thought there was a final. Okay, and then you have the feedback slide. So please do please give us an evaluation. We appreciate it. And thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of the workshop.